Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Today, inshallah, we will talk about the subject that we started last week from the era of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an, and we start talking about the opening or the conquest of Iraq. And it is part of the history of, as a matter of fact, if you want to call it the glorious history of Islam, how the Islam spread across the world. And it is also of utmost importance for us, not only ourselves as adults, but our children should be aware of our history. And history is something, if we don't learn from it, then we tend to make the same mistakes over and over. So history, whether it is mentioned in the Quran, in the shape of the qasas, the stories mentioned in the Quran, or the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are for the ibrah, for the lessons that we learn from. And same thing is about the rest of the history as well. Of course, the history is not something from the historical perspective specifically. We extract the rules of Islam, but rather this is something to learn. If there's something good, then we can learn good lessons out of it. If there's something bad has happened, then those harms that reached us through those historical events, so we should be able to avoid them. So one of the things that we learned from the last week's talk, and we start talking about how Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh was very well informed about when he sent the armies through Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh from one front, and Muthanna radiallahu anh from another, and the third was Iyad radiallahu anh from the northeast front of the Iraq. And before I go further into that, there are a couple of concepts that, inshallah, we will learn from that. One of the key things that we learn out of these conquests is the bravery of these Sahaba or Tabi'een. And this idea of bravery, or the opposite, which is cowardice or jubn, is something, so cowardice or jubn is condemned. And we were actually commanded to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects us from that. As one of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which is a muttafaqun alayh hadith, reported by both Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim in their Sahihain. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ajzi wal-kasal wal-jubn wal-harami wal-bukhl wa a'udhu bika min adab al-qabr wa min fitnat al-mahya wal-mamat. The meaning of this hadith is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, O Allah, I seek refuge in you from disability or incapacity, sloth or laziness, cowardice, senility and miserliness. And I seek refuge in you from the torment of the grave, punishment of the grave, and from the trials of the life and the death. So this is something Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has commanded us, because he is the one who also sought refuge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we do the same thing. And other lesson, inshallah, from the stories that we are reading through or going through, we will learn about another aspect of it, which is we find that the armies of the Muslims that were going towards the Iraq, they were very small compared to the army of the Persian Empire at that time. And let's not forget, when we say Persian Empire, it was one of the two superpowers of that time. whether it was the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the time of Abu Bakr and later on in the time of Umar as well. So Muslims were very small in number still. And they just had the setback of passing away of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then a huge setback of the apostasy war that was happening. Even then, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, he moved towards one first against the Romans, the superpower at that time, and now in Iraq he was against the Persians. What was the purpose of that? It's not the resources the Muslims were after. And it will never be the case we find the Muslim Ummah, a Muslim army, was seeking those, the goods of the world. All those wars or the battles that happened, that was in seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to spread the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to spread the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the mankind. And all those, as a matter of fact, every war in the world is oppressive, except the one which is done for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because otherwise it's either for the resources, or either for revenge, or for your family name, or the nation, and this and that. It's only that which is for the sake, for spreading the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the only just war. The rest of them are, in general, are unjust wars. So now, another aspect that we should learn, we must learn, is it's not the issue of how big the army is or was. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when talking about the army of Jalut in the Quran, talks about and says very clearly that كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله. How many times have you seen this? That a small group was able to take over the larger group by the idhn of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu ma'a sabirin. And Allah Azza wa Jal is with the steadfast ones, the one who are sabirin. See, this is interesting, that it is talking about a group taking over a larger group, and that's talking about the battlefield. But Allah is saying, Wallahu ma'a sabirin. That means the one who are patient one, which is roughly translated in English many a times, it's more of a steadfast one. It's a closer meaning for sabirin than to say patient ones, because patient ones normally has a meaning and it gives a connotation of passiveness. While here it's not the passive action done by a smaller group against a larger group. And this is the very same thing that we see, and this is what we learn from, whether it is, we talk about in the time of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, when Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh was up against much bigger armies, whether it was in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the days of the battle of Mu'tah, when the 3,000 soldiers were up against 200,000. And even now, in the time of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, when Khalid bin Walid was commanded to go from Yamama, Battle of Yamama, to now, after you're done from there, go towards Iraq. Subhanallah. There's no rest. And when he went there, Abu Bakr also instructed him, as we talked about last week, do not force anybody. Whoever wishes to go on his own, take him. And he was able to get only 2,000 people along with him. And then he was able to gather another 8,000 on the way by sending letters and reminding the people on the way about the bounties from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who raises the kalimatullah, or the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, so that's the second thing to learn about in this, when we talk about inshallah. And the third thing is, because when we will, which we still will not be able to get there today, about the army of Iyad, that he went through very difficult times, as a matter of fact, in Dumat al-Jandal, which we will not get there today. Because as you remember, when Abu Bakr commanded Khalid bin Walid and Iyad, the command was that whoever reaches Hira first, he will take control of the whole army together. And it was, of course, Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh was the one who reached there first, because Iyad was not able to make as fast success as Khalid bin Walid was making. So what we also learn from the third thing, so there are three things I want to make sure we understand. One is bravery is one of the characteristics of a believer, to be brave and to avoid cowardice. Second thing is victory always comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not a number, it's not the resources. And we can see in the historically, a smaller group has taken over the larger groups. And if that was not been the case, then the larger group or the powerful one will always remain powerful. They would have never been taken down. Because if it's the issue of power, it's the issue of all sorts of resources one nation or one group of people have, then they would never be beaten. But that's not the case. So we should learn about it. Sometimes these numbers, these resources, make us think this way. Oh, we are in this difficult situation, we will never be able to overcome as an ummah. So this is the second lesson. And third one is, which was the verses that revealed after the battle of Uhud, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ وَلَيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ وَاللَّهُ لَيُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, look, these days of up and down, that sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. We give to men by turns, and by Allah, and that Allah tests those who believe. And not only that, this is interesting when Allah says that وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ, and Allah may take the martyrs from you, shuhada from you. Allah chooses them. This is not only the issue of, like, look at Khalid bin Walid radiyallahu an. He's one of those soldiers who was in the battlefield for one of the longest period of time probably. And he was still not a martyr. It's not up to him. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He chooses. Wallahu la yuhibbu al-dhalimin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do not like the oppressors or polytheists or dhalimun. Now, moving forward, so Khalid bin Walid radiyallahu an, when he was moving towards the Iraq, as I said, so he had about 2,000 fighters with him. And further, he was able to mobilize another 8,000. And along the way, he wrote to Muslim leaders, each of whom was already stationed in Iraq. So who were the one who was stationed in Iraq? We know that Muthanna, radiallahu an, he was ahead of Khalid bin Walid radiallahu an, while he was busy with the Battle of Yamama. And Muthanna was from the people of Iraq. That's another beautiful thing, amazing thing about Islam. When Islam came, people were divided into tribes. And the tribalism was very much inherited and innate in them. Islam came and erased all those kind of things that used to divide the people and united them as one brotherhood. And even though he was from Iraq, he's the one who wanted to open the land of Iraq for the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be spread over there. And he was there prior to Khalid bin Walid. Hence, the other 8,000, which were under three leaders that Khalid bin Walid wrote the letters, they were under Muthanna. And of course, when Muthanna met Khalid bin Walid, as the command of Abu Bakr was, that then Khalid bin Walid becomes the leader. So that became 18,000. So altogether, he had the army of 18,000. Now compare that to when you look at the huge army that Kisra was sending. It was a very small number. So before arriving in Iraq, so as Khalid was writing the letters, so they gathered at the area which is called Al-Ubla. This is the place that all the armies met, and Muslims were able to gather about 18,000 fighters over there. Now here, Khalid bin Walid radiallahu an, he wanted to meet all the people over there in Ubla. So when he drew near to the enemy, he divided his army into 3 battalions. Each one traveled by different roads. The first headed by Al-Muthanna radiallahu an, and second by Adi bin Hatim, another great Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the third by Khalid himself. Now these three battalions were about to meet up to the place which is called Al-Hudayr. Now the army of Kisra was led by Hormuz. And Hormuz was another great general. He figured out that Khalid will be trying to get to Al-Hudayr, so he wanted to reach there first. And he was able to reach there first, and not only that, he controlled the water resource over there. So because he was a general, he was aware of how to fight, so he controlled the only water resource that existed there. And he picked the best spot over there as well. Now Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh, he understood that now it is now first main important thing here is the battle for the water resource. So hence he spread the army in a manner, and this is what we have to learn from the Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh. His know-how of battlefields and how to use the army in the best possible manner. And Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh understood the water was the main resource, hence we have to get to water. And he spread the army in the way to get towards the water, and to do that, to make them faster, he made the horsemen and the one who were on the foot soldiers to lighten up. So do not carry too much of the load with them. So move fast enough towards the water. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that time helped the believers as well. The cloud came over on the army of the Muslims. It rained, and the Muslims were able to collect the water from that, and they were able to quench their thirst and gather some water for themselves as well. So this is a help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something, I am not trying to say here that these are miracles are happening, because miracles have a different connotation and meaning. Because the mu'jizah or the miracles are given to the prophets, and for a different purpose. That's for the recognition of a prophet, who is the prophet and who is a liar. Now this is a help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah descends the help whoever He wishes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did help. And this is something, as a believer, we must understand that as well, that it's not the resources or your strength that gives us victory. One of the key elements that provides us victory is we follow and do what Allah commands, so we have the favors of Allah on our side. This is bigger than anything else we can have in the world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on our side. And that's what the Muslim always sought, and that's what that gave them the victory. Now, when the Muslims reached, so they are the one who were able to gather some water from the rain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided. Now, when they came across the army of Hormuz, the general of the Kisra, now Hormuz, one of the things about him was, as we know, the Muslim army was much smaller than the army. The number is not mentioned there, but it was much bigger than the Muslim army. He was arrogant. He thought of it that they can just get rid of the Muslims very easily. And they always look down on the Muslims, specifically the Arabs. They look down at them as they are low life. They are the people who are Bedouins. They live in the rough environment of the desert. They don't have enough to eat. They have not enough to clothe themselves, and so on and so forth. As inshallah, when we talk about the Qadisiyah in the time of Umar al-Khattab, we'll see that how Rustam was very arrogant against the believers at that time as well. So was Hormuz. So Hormuz became arrogant. And he actually called up Khalid bin Walid, the leader of the Muslim army. He said, I want to have a duel with you. And I'll come get rid of you, and then your army is done. This is what he's thinking in his head. And that's what used to be. The duels were used to be among the big fighters of two armies to build the morals of whichever side wins. Now, in this case, Hormuz was being tricky. He wanted to invite Khalid for duel, but he also had his guards ready to ambush Khalid bin Walid. Subhanallah. Now, in this case, what happened was, it's not the issue of Khalid bin Walid could have been ambushed, Khalid bin Walid went ahead and he started a duel with Hormuz. Now here, Khalid had the upper hand over Hormuz. While he had the upper hand, his guys were going to ambush, but on the other hand, if you remember, there was one Sahabi that Abu Bakr Siddiq sent to help Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu when he asked for help. When he asked for help, he sent one Sahabi, and the Sahabi was Al-Qaqa bin Amr. Al-Qaqa radiallahu anhu, he was keeping an eye on Khalid bin Walid and at the same time the guards of Hormuz. And when these guards were about to ambush, Al-Qaqa went ahead and with his guys and he attacked those guards as well. And Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu was able to kill Hormuz here. He was the leader of their army. Khalid killed Hormuz, and at the same time, Al-Qaqa was able to get rid of these the guards. Now see, this is where you understand, it's not when Abu Bakr Siddiq sent one Sahabi with this saying that it's not the issue of numbers, it's the presence of these kind of personalities. See, only a personality like Qaqa can think of, okay, we have to keep an eye on these guards now when Abu Bakr or when Khalid bin Walid is against Hormuz. This is what Qaqa's importance was. And he was able to turn the whole battle because of that incident in the favor of the Muslims, because now the leader of the army of the Persians was killed by Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh. Now here, then the regular war started and the Muslims had the upper hand, and these, the army of the Kisra, they start running away. These soldiers of the army of Hormuz, they tied themselves with the chains. And the reason they used to tie themselves with chains, so they will not run away, they will not show their backs, one. Second, they will be able to stop the flood of the enemy. But that sometimes when you are losing, that goes against you. Because now you cannot undo yourself from those salasil is called, this is why salasil means chain in Arabic. Hence this battle is called Dhatul Salasil. The one that has the salasil or the chains. Because the army of the Kisra, in this case under the Hormuz, was chained together. Now there was a huge amount of spoils of war was won by the Muslims here. And as usual, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded, that goes, the 1/5 goes to Allah and His Messenger. Of course, now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away. Allah and His Messenger means the state that exists at that time. And now in this case, Abu Bakr was the caretaker of it. Hence it goes to Abu Bakr. And the rest of it, Abu Bakr, Khalid bin Walid, he distributed among the soldiers over there. Now, when this 1/5 came, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, he saw there was it's called there's a hoodie. The hoodie belongs to Hormuz, Qalansawa. Now that belonged to Hormuz, and they used when they looked at the price, the amount of it. As a matter, Abu Bakr did not know, but he sent it back to Khalid as a gift. When Khalid received it, he found out the value of that was, it just says 100,000, sorry. And 100,000, if it's dinar or dirham, it's not mentioned. And this is sometimes we see in the books, that it just says number, and it does not give the unit of it. But it says 100,000, whether it's dinar or dirham, it's a huge amount. Of course, this dinar is way bigger than what could be with the dirham. But this is what the Persians used to have. These hoodies they used to wear, that was according to their status. And Hormuz had one of the highest statuses among them. So hence, the one he had was about 100,000. After that, when the Muslims won, now the army of Hormuz, it went back, and they moved back. When they moved back, actually there's something else happened prior to this battle start, and that was because of his arrogance. He was not able to get the help that Kisra sent. Kisra, as a matter of fact, sent more help to Hormuz. But Hormuz was thinking of, I don't care about the help anymore. He thought of it, he can take care of these Arabs, these Muslims who are coming in this direction without any help. So even though Kisra sent an army and he did not wait for that army, and hence he ended up losing the battle. Now, the army that he sent was under Qaran. Now, the Qaran who was on his way, he was able to gather the rest of the army of Hormuz and the battalion that he came along with. Now, these are the ones they start gathering, and now they wanted to fight against Khalid bin Walid, the rest of the army that was still there. Because Khalid was not staying there. He was moving towards Hira. And they understood the move that the Muslims were making. There were two armies, as I said, and we haven't talked about Riyad's army yet, who was coming from the north, and Khalid was coming from the south. They were supposed to meet in the middle at Hira, and then move towards the capital of the Kisra, which was Madain. Now, then the second stop for Khalid bin Walid was, which is the Battle of Al-Madar. These are all Persians' names at that time. And Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu an, he started moving towards Madar, and Khalid ordered Muthanna bin Haritha and his brother Mu'anna to chase those soldiers who were fleeing from Dhatul Salasil. And they were able to get some of them, but the rest, they ran away. Now, the army of Qaran had two main battalions. One was led by Qabad, and the other was Anu Shajan. These are two of the generals that he had, and these both soldiers were from the army of Hormuz, as a matter of fact. But these two soldiers, or these two generals, they ran away from the battle. But when they met Qaran over there, they became part of his army, and they were going to fight against the Muslims. Now, in the early stages of the battle, Qabad and Anu Shajan, they faced very difficult times against the Muslim fighters. And they were both, Qabad was by Asim bin Amr al-Tamimi. And so was the Anu Shajan was later on as well killed. And Khalid made the camp al-Madar, and he gave each Muslim the belonging of all the army. And this battle was also very quickly was won by the Muslims. Now, after that, the Muslim army moved towards, there's another area called Al-Walja. And over here, there's the general sent by the Kisra was, his name was Andar Zaghr. It's a very difficult name to pronounce. Again, this is a Farsi name. And this general was sent by Kisra by another huge army, and he was supposed to be held by Bahman, Jadhiya. And this battle did not last too long as well. Muslims won the battle, and then they moved towards the battle of Al-Iyas. I will not go into all the details of that. And they continued to move until they get to the area called Al-Hira. Al-Hira, as I mentioned, is the area which was Khalid bin Walid radiallahu an was supposed to meet Iyad bin Ghanam radiallahu an. But Iyad, he was not able to make to this area. Now, since he could not make it, and he was still busy with Dumatul Jandal, which we'll talk about next week, inshallah. Now, Khalid, instead of just waiting there, he started moving towards Iyad, so he can help him out. And this is something that we have to learn, inshallah, from here. But when Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu an, when he won the battle, one of the things that he mentioned, specifically after the battle of the Walja, because there's a lot of huge amount of ghanima, spoils of war came. And the speech he said, do you not see the great variety of food over here? By Allah, had fighting in the way of Allah and inviting others to Islam not being obligatory upon us, And had we not been here only for worldly gain, it would still be wise for us to stay here and take control of this countryside. Now, this speech that Khalid was given, by no means Khalid was trying to say that we as Muslims will be coming here for the food, a variety of food and the clothing that was existing at the area. But he was more motivating the soldiers he had around him, that people would go for these kind of things. And we did not even come for these things. We have a much bigger cause that we are fighting for, which is to raise the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, even if we did not have that, we had another cause here. Again, that does not mean that he was trying to say to the Muslims over there that this is what we are fighting for. But he's trying to show that we have a much bigger reason than these worldly things that we may be attracted by, which is to raise the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so inshallah we will stop here, as I don't want to make it too long. Just to remind you of, up to here, that the army of Khalid bin Walid reached Hira. There are few things to remember which I mentioned in the beginning. One is that we should seek refuge from cowardice, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to make this dua. And bravery or shuja'ah, this is part of a believer's characteristics. Second thing, it's not the issue of the size of the army or the resources. It's whether Allah is on our side or not. That's what brings the victory. Yes, we take care of all the asbab or the things that are needed for our actions, but at the end of the day, victory comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the third thing, which is the ups and downs are part of our lives. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests the believers by these winning and losing sometime, to see who's the one who continues to stick with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded, who's the one who is from the sabirin, who's the one who is steadfast in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jazakumullah khairan. If there's any questions or comments about the subject covered